The sun barely pierced the horizon as Thomas Brennan rode across the open plains. He adjusted his grip on the reins, glancing up at the dusty sky that seemed to stretch endlessly before him. It was early, far too early. But that was the way of things on the frontier, long days and even longer nights. He was used to working hard, used to the early mornings, but nothing had prepared him for this, for the silence, the vast emptiness of the land, and the woman who stood at the heart of it all. He had received the telegram in town a week ago. Help needed at the Wolf Ranch, it had read. Room, board, and fair wages. That was enough for Thomas. He had nowhere else to go. His father's farm had been lost to the bank, and the last of his family's money had been spent trying to keep it afloat. Now, he was a drifter, a man without a place. And when Mr. Holloway, a local banker, offered him the chance to work on a ranch, he had taken it without a second thought. What he had not expected was her. When Thomas first laid eyes on Catherine Kate Wolf, he thought she was a myth, an impossible thing, larger than life. At least 7 feet tall, she stood with a strength that could crush men. Yet there was something about her that drew him in. It wasn't just the way she moved, though that was impressive enough. It was the weight of her presence, the way the land seemed to bow to her. The air around her felt thick, charged with unspoken challenges, past scars, and untold stories. She had been waiting for him at the ranch when he arrived, a figure of raw, untamed power against the horizon. She stood with her back to him, her broad shoulders hunched as she worked on the broken fence, her hair falling in a long braid down her back. The sun cast a sharp silhouette around her, but even in the dimming light, Thomas could see the way she carried herself. No hesitations, no apologies. Just the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through it all. Her voice, when it came, was as gruff as the wind that whipped across the plains. "You the new hand?" The words were simple, direct, but they carried weight, like everything else about her. Thomas hesitated for a moment before answering, stepping off his horse. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud, but he felt like a child standing next to her. "Yes, ma'am. Thomas Brennan." "Mr. Holloway sent me. Said you needed help with the ranch." She didn't look at him, only continued to work, pulling the splintered fence post from the earth with a single tug, as though it was little more than a piece of wood. The motion was effortless, too easy. Thomas stood, watching, unable to look away. "You're too small," she said flatly, her voice devoid of any malice. It wasn't an insult, it was a fact, one she had probably said 1,000 times to others. "I'll do my best," he replied, his voice quieter than he intended. She turned then, a slight shift of her weight, and for the first time, her gaze landed on him fully. Her ice-blue eyes met his, sharp as a blade, and for a moment, Thomas felt a wave of heat crawl up his spine. She didn't smile, not even a hint of recognition. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him feel like she was sizing him up, measuring his worth in the seconds it took to cross the space between them. "Best ain't always enough," she said, her lips twitching with the faintest curve, "but you can try." Her words were blunt, and Thomas could feel the sting of them. But there was no malice, no cruelty in her tone. She spoke the way she worked, direct, without frills, and honest. He didn't know why, but somehow, that made him want to try harder. "Where should I start?" he asked. She motioned to the barn. "The roof needs patching, the cattle need moving, and you can start with the stalls." She paused, then added, "Don't break anything." He nodded and made his way toward the barn, unsure of what to expect, but feeling an odd sense of determination take root inside him. He had been running from his past, from his family's debts, and from the life that had crumbled beneath him. But something about this place, about Kate, made him think that maybe he could stop. Maybe here, on this piece of land, he could start to rebuild. The barn smelled of hay and leather and animals, and as Thomas climbed the ladder to the roof, the full weight of his work began to sink in. The sun beat down mercilessly on his back, the roof slats hot beneath his hands as he worked. Sweat stung his eyes, and his arms ached with each hammer strike, but still, he pushed on. Every now and then, he would glance down at Kate, who was working in the corral, her strength and precision captivating. She moved with a fluidity that was almost graceful, the way she tamed the wild horse. Her motions were economical, controlled, and Thomas felt a pang of admiration deep in his chest. She didn't just break horses, she bent them to her will, and as he watched, he realized that it wasn't just the horses she controlled. It was the land, the cattle, the ranch. It was everything. Hours passed, the sun sinking lower in the sky, and still, Kate kept working. Thomas had finished the roof by the time the first stars appeared in the evening sky, his body sore and tired, but there was a sense of accomplishment settling deep inside him. As he made his way to the house, Kate was already there, sitting on the porch, her boots propped up on the railing, staring out over the land. "Good job today," she said without looking at him, her voice calm but not unkind. "Didn't break anything." Thomas smiled, the small victory making him feel a little taller, a little more confident. "Thank you." He sat beside her, the silence stretching out comfortably between them. For a moment there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling the dry grass and the faint call of birds overhead. Thomas felt something stir inside him. There was a heaviness in the air, something unspoken. After a while, Kate stood, dusting off her trousers. "Supper's inside. I'll get the cattle moved tomorrow." She didn't wait for him to respond before she turned and walked inside. Thomas followed, his heart still racing from the way she had looked at him, from the way his own body had reacted to her presence. The inside of the house was small, but tidy. There was a warmth to it, the kind of homey feeling that made him want to settle in, despite the uncertainty that always seemed to linger around him. Kate set the table for two, and Thomas couldn't help but notice how much room she took up, the way her broad shoulders almost filled the small space. She moved with the confidence of someone who had lived a life of hardship and strength, and Thomas admired that. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the scrape of their forks and the occasional crackle from the fire in the hearth. Thomas watched her as she ate, trying not to stare. But it was hard not to notice the way her muscles rippled beneath her shirt, the way she ate with the same casual ease she brought to everything else. "Where'd you come from?" she asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Town," he replied. "Had to leave. The bank took my family's farm." Kate nodded. She didn't ask any more questions, just kept eating, her expression unreadable, and for a moment, Thomas felt the weight of the silence between them. There was a story behind those eyes, a pain she carried with her. He didn't know what it was, but something told him it wasn't just about the ranch. He couldn't help himself. "What about you? Where's your family?" Kate's eyes hardened, but her voice stayed calm. "Lost my husband a few years ago. He thought he could control me, thought my strength was something to be ashamed of." Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. "It's not something I talk about." He nodded, understanding that she wasn't looking for sympathy. They ate in silence for a while longer, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Kate than just the tough exterior she wore. She had been through things he couldn't even begin to understand. The night grew colder, and Kate stood to clear the table. "There's a bed in the loft for you," she said. "Sleep well. We've got a lot of work tomorrow." As he climbed into the loft that night, Thomas couldn't help but think about Kate's words, the weight of the life she had lived, and the unexpected pull he felt toward her. Something about her, about them, was different, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it yet. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about survival. This was something more, and he wasn't ready to let it go. The sun had barely broken the horizon when Thomas awoke the next morning. The loft was cold, the air thick with the scent of hay and dust. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, feeling the remnants of the restless night in his muscles. His body ached from the previous day's work, but his mind was restless, alive with thoughts of Kate, her strength, and the unspoken tension that had thickened between them. He swung his legs over the side of the cot, the floor rough beneath his bare feet. From below, he could hear the sound of boots against wood, the creak of floorboards, and the familiar murmur of Kate's low voice. She was already up, already working. He quickly dressed and made his way downstairs. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of Kate moving about. She was at the stove, a pot of coffee brewing, and the smell of sizzling bacon filled the air. She didn't look up as he entered, but he noticed the faint tension in her shoulders, the way her body was always a little coiled, like she was expecting something bad to happen at any moment. "Morning," he said, his voice rough, from sleep. She nodded in acknowledgement but didn't respond right away. There was no warmth in her gaze, but that wasn't new. Kate was a woman of few words, and what little she said always carried weight, like it had been earned through years of hardship. "Sit," she said, pointing to the table. "Coffee's ready." Thomas sat, taking a deep breath. He hadn't been here long, but already he felt like he was part of the land, like this place was slowly becoming his home. There was something about the simplicity of it all, the hard work, the quiet beauty of the ranch, and, most of all, Kate, that made him want to stay. He had no idea what she saw in him. She was strong, fierce, capable of everything. He was just a man trying to survive, trying to make something out of nothing. But when she looked at him, there was something in her eyes that made him believe maybe he wasn't as small and insignificant as he felt. "I'm going to need you to fix the fence in the west pasture." "Today?" Kate said as she set down a steaming mug of coffee in front of him. "It's been falling apart for weeks, and I can't afford to have any more gaps." "Of course," Thomas said, taking the mug in his hands, his fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. The heat of it grounded him, steadied his racing thoughts. "Anything else?" She shot him a quick glance, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Keep your eyes open out there. There's something off about the herd. I don't trust it." Thomas nodded. "I'll keep watch." "Good," she said, turning her attention back to the stove. There was an edge to her voice, a sharpness that he knew better than to ignore. Kate had instincts that were as finely honed as her skill with a rifle, and when she sensed something was wrong, it was always best to listen. They ate quickly. The meal, simple but satisfying: eggs, bacon, and thick slices of bread toasted over the fire. Kate didn't speak much while she ate, but Thomas caught the occasional glance from her, something unreadable in her eyes. He wondered what was on her mind, but it wasn't the kind of thing you ask someone like Kate. She'd tell him when she was ready, and not a moment sooner. Once breakfast was done, they moved outside. Kate handed him a shovel, a few supplies, and then pointed toward the west pasture. The land stretched out before them, brown and barren under the heat of the sun. It was harsh work, the kind of labor that ate away at you piece by piece, but Thomas had always known hard work. It was the only thing he had ever relied on. The fence had been broken by the storms of the past few weeks, and now it was his job to fix it before the cattle started to stray. As he worked, he kept one eye on the horizon, scanning the dry landscape. The wind was picking up, kicking dust into the air, making everything shimmer like a mirage. The land seemed endless here, too vast for just one person to handle. But that was exactly what Kate had done, for years, fighting to keep her ranch alive, to make something out of nothing. She was a force of nature, relentless and unstoppable, and Thomas found himself in awe of her strength, of the way she held the world at bay, with nothing but sheer will. As the day wore on, the hours blending into one long, unbroken stretch of work, Thomas couldn't help but notice the quiet way Kate moved through the ranch. She was always working, always moving from task to task, her hands never still. She didn't let anyone help her, not because she was stubborn, but because she had never been given the chance to rely on anyone. She was the one who fixed the fence, who moved the cattle, who carried the burden of the ranch on her broad shoulders. And yet, there was something in her eyes, something behind the toughness that made Thomas wonder if, deep down, she was as lonely as he was. By the time the sun began to sink below the horizon, Kate was still at work, as if the day would never end. Thomas. He had finished his part of the fence and was helping to herd the cattle back toward the corral when she came up beside him. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the herd. She didn't speak at first, just guided her horse alongside his, and they rode in silence for a while, side by side. "How's it going?" Thomas asked, breaking the quiet. Kate turned her gaze to him, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes. Something soft, something human. "It's going," she replied, her voice a little quieter than usual. "You did good today. Thank you." He nodded, not sure what to say in response. He wasn't used to receiving praise, and coming from her, it meant more than it would have from anyone else. "You're not like the others," Kate said suddenly, her voice low but strong. "Most men who come through here last a week, maybe 2. They think they're going to fix things, make a name for themselves, but they can't handle it. You don't talk about it, but I see you working. You don't. Quit." Thomas felt the weight of her words, the recognition, but he didn't know how to explain that he wasn't doing it for a name or for glory. He was doing it because he had no choice, because this was the only place that had taken him in, the only place that had given him a shot. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice more certain than he felt. "Not until I've earned my place." Kate looked at him then, really looked at him, her gaze piercing and sharp. For a moment, the silence between them was full of something unspoken, something Thomas couldn't put into words. He wanted to ask her about the walls she had built around herself, about the hurt that lingered behind her eyes, but he knew better than to pry. She would open up when she was ready. They finished with the herd and made their way back to the house, the evening air cool against their skin after the punishing heat of the day. The house was quiet when they arrived, the only sound the creak of the door as Kate opened it. She glanced back at him, and for a moment their eyes met something passing between them, an understanding, a connection, that neither of them had expected. Inside, They didn't speak much. Kate went to the stove, pulling out a pot of stew, and Thomas set the table. They ate together, their words few, but their actions speaking volumes. It wasn't much, just a meal shared in silence, but for Thomas, it was more than he had ever imagined he would have. As the night wore on, they found themselves on the porch again, sitting side by side, the air thick with the scent of the land. The stars stretched overhead, a vast, endless sea of light. Kate leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're staying, huh?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper against the night. "Yeah," Thomas said, his voice steady. "I'm staying." Kate nodded, as if she had already known the answer. She didn't need to ask why. She understood that sometimes there was nowhere else to go. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than the simple words suggested. "I didn't think I'd ever find someone who could keep up." Thomas smiled, looking at her with something more than admiration in his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Kate." And as they sat there in the quiet, watching the night unfold around them, Thomas realized something that had been growing in him for days, something he hadn't been able to name until now. He wasn't just here to work. He was here because Kate Wolfe, this giant of a woman, had become his home, and he wasn't ready to let that go. The morning after their quiet conversation on the porch, Thomas woke to the sound of birds chirping and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. The light filtering through the barn windows was warm and golden, casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. He stretched, every muscle sore from the previous day's work, but there was a new energy in him now. A sense of purpose, a certainty that had been lacking in the months before. When he stepped outside, the sun was already high in the sky, and Kate was nowhere to be seen. He assumed she was already out working, as usual, but there was something different in the way the land felt this morning. It was as though, somehow, it was his land too now, as if the wide open spaces, the rolling pastures, the rugged mountains beyond, had begun to welcome him. After a quick breakfast of bread and coffee, he gathered the tools he needed for the day and headed out toward the west pasture. The fence repairs had been taking longer than expected, and there were still parts of it that needed reinforcement. As he worked, his thoughts kept drifting to Kate. She had become his world in a way he hadn't anticipated. He admired her strength, her resilience, but more than that, he saw the softness beneath her tough exterior, the vulnerability she rarely showed. It wasn't just the way she held herself, commanding respect with every movement. It wasn't the way her large hands worked with the land, shaping it, making it her own. It was how she treated him, how she made him feel valued, even when she didn't have to. Kate had let him in when she didn't have to, and Thomas couldn't help but wonder if she saw in him something he didn't see in himself, something worth holding on to. The day passed slowly, the work exhausting but fulfilling. He was in the middle of fixing a particularly stubborn section of the fence when he heard the sound of hooves approaching. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the sun, and saw Kate riding toward him on her massive black stallion. She was moving at a steady pace, her expression unreadable as always, but Thomas noticed the tension in her posture. She was always tense these days, as if waiting for something to go wrong. As she drew closer, she waved. "How's the fence coming?" "Getting there," Thomas replied, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Not as fast as I'd like, but it's coming." Kate dismounted smoothly, her large frame moving with surprising grace. She walked toward him, her boots crunching against the gravel. There was something about her presence that made the air feel heavier, more charged. Thomas couldn't help but feel the weight of her gaze on him, that intense, all-seeing look that seemed to pierce through everything. "How's the cattle?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation light, though he could tell something was weighing on her. "Fine for now," she replied, her voice tight. "But I've been hearing things, people talking, and I don't like it." Thomas set the hammer down and turned to face her. "What do you mean?" She ran a hand through her hair, a rare sign of agitation. "There are whispers, Thomas. Whispers about the land. About me. People saying I'm too much, too strong, too everything. And that doesn't sit right with me. Not one bit." Thomas frowned, taking a step closer to her. "What are you going to do about it?" Kate looked at him, her blue eyes piercing. "What can I do? This ranch isn't just about the land. It's about reputation, too. And I don't know how long I can hold this all together, how long I can keep fighting on my own." "You're not alone," Thomas said firmly, stepping closer. "You don't have to do it by yourself, not anymore." For a moment, There was silence between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Kate's jaw clenched as she looked away, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. I've been alone for a long time, Thomas. I'm not used to anyone helping me, and I'm not sure I want to get used to it. Thomas took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. He knew better than anyone what it was like to feel abandoned, to feel like the world was against you. But what he felt for Kate was something deeper than mere sympathy. It was a connection, something he hadn't expected but that he couldn't deny. You don't have to do everything by yourself, he said softly. Let me help. We can fight this together. Kate's eyes softened, just for a moment. I'm not sure you understand what you're asking. The way things work around here, it's different. People like Walsh and his friends, they have power, and I don't. Thomas reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You have more power than you realize, Kate. You've built this place with your bare hands. You've fought for it, and you've made it yours. That's more power than any man in town has. Kate looked at him, her expression torn between disbelief and something else. Something softer, something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. I'm scared, Thomas, she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Scared that one day I'm going to lose everything. And when that happens, there won't be anything left. Thomas pulled her into a red hug, holding her tightly, the warmth of her body comforting in a way he couldn't explain. I won't let you lose it, he whispered, his words firm, unwavering. You don't have to fight this alone. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, Kate didn't move, her body stiff in his arms. But then, slowly, she relaxed, her breath evening out as she let herself lean into him. It was the first time in a long time that Thomas saw her let her guard down, and it made something in his chest tighten with emotion. After a few moments, she pulled back, looking up at him with a vulnerability that took him by surprise. Thank you, she murmured. I don't know what I would do without you. You'll never have to find out, Thomas said, his voice steady. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Kate nodded, her eyes lingering on his. For a brief moment, everything else faded away. The ranch, the land, the whispering voices in town. There was only the two of them, standing together in the quiet of the pasture, connected in a way that neither had expected but both needed. The days that followed felt like a turning point. With Kate's blessing, Thomas took on more of the work around the ranch, helping her with the cattle, the fencing, and the land itself. He wasn't just a hired hand anymore. He was part of the team, part of the life they were building together. As the work continued, so did the tensions. The whispers in town grew louder, and the threat of Walsh's influence loomed over them both. But despite the pressure, something in Kate changed. She was still fierce, still unyielding, but there was a softness in her that Thomas had never seen before. She wasn't as guarded with him, wasn't as afraid to let him in, and he knew, without a doubt, that she was beginning to see him the way he had always seen her, strong, capable, and indispensable. But the battle was far from over. They had the papers, they had the proof, but that didn't mean Walsh and his men were going to back down. It didn't mean the town would accept Kate's place in it. The whispers would only grow louder. And yet, as they rode side by side through the rolling hills, with the land spread out before them, Thomas felt something in his heart settle. The world might not ever fully accept them, but together they could face anything.